Next on Link TV, Latin polls, news and analysis from Latin America as seen by Latin American media, followed by a panel discussion on the issues. Next on Latin polls, only on Link TV.
The following program is an original production of Link TV.
In Latin America, soccer is a game of passion, and they take it to heart. What many consider to be the biggest game in the world has also become so huge that when national teams play, entire countries come to a stop. And it's also big business. Is soccer simply a game, or is it an escape from the reality of poverty and corruption in Latin America? This and more coming up next on Latin Pulse. Hello and welcome to Pulso Latino. I'm your host, Ena Cuevas. Our topic tonight, football with a U. ¡Arriba los Chivas! In the U.S., it's called soccer, but for the rest of the world, it goes by its real name, football. In Spanish, it's spelled with a U. It's big business and far from being just a game. It's passion, it's finesse, and it's a game where Latin America excels. It's perhaps one of the few areas where the region can defy the world and end up on top. But Latin Americans are so passionate about football that often games end in violence. This violence seems to be widespread among football fans, like the following scene from a game in Argentina.
Este penal jamás pudo patearse. La invasión de los hinchas de Nueva Chicago terminó por anticipado el partido que decretó el descenso del equipo de Mataderos. La primera víctima del aluvión de fanáticos fue el propio Mono Navarro Montoya, al que le saquearon la ropa. La gente intentaba huir como podía. Esta mujer embarazada quedó en medio de las piedras. Afuera el caos seguía. Y nadie ni nada quedaba a salvo de los destrozos.
In places such as Colombia, entire games have been canceled. Police just can't guarantee the safety of the players or the fans. Colombia's Caracol has that story.
El barrismo, la guerra de símbolos, sigue originando los peores enfrentamientos en el fútbol colombiano. Ahora fue en Santa Marta, en el Clásico de la Costa, se presentó por parte de los hinchas del Junior el robo de un llamado trapo a una de las barras del Unión Magdalena en el propio estadio Eduardo Santos. Eso originó la ira de los aficionados del Unión, que empezaron de a poco una batalla campal. Por lo menos una decena de heridos entre policías y fanáticos fue el resultado de este enfrentamiento. La fuerza pública resultó insuficiente para controlar a la masa. Ni siquiera los gases lacrimógenos pudieron apaciguar el caldeado ánimo de los furiosos hinchas. Jueces y jugadores se fueron a los camerinos. Mientras tanto, la guerra seguía en el campo de juego.
In Chile, those who are detained or arrested for being violent during a match are banned from future games. Chile's Tele 13 reports it's the worst thing that can happen to a soccer fan.
El miércoles la violencia nuevamente remeció San Carlos, pero esta vez llamó la atención lo rápido con que dos de los detenidos fueron drásticamente sancionados. 2 años de prohibición absoluta para asistir al estadio.
Para un hincha apasionado es el castigo más fuerte que se puede recibir, o sea, no poder ir cuando juega su equipo.
Una dura medida en que se aprovechó los recursos de la nueva justicia.
Football can basically be played by anybody, anywhere, and most do, even presidents. Bolivia's Evo Morales has joined a football team and is expected to play.
Evo Morales, presidente de Bolivia, será el nuevo refuerzo del Club Litoral, equipo semiprofesional del fútbol de Bolivia. El mandatario podría debutar el próximo fin de semana.
Morales played football to call attention to a ban by FIFA, the World Soccer Authority. In 2007, FIFA banned playing any international games 9,800 feet above sea level. The ban affects mainly Bolivia, where some cities, like its capital, La Paz, sit above 10,000 feet. Diego Armando Maradona, who many consider one of the world's best soccer players, has strongly criticized FIFA's decision. Maradona was recently in Bolivia, where he said players are capable of playing at high altitudes.
Y no creo que tengamos miedo de venir a jugar a la altura, porque nosotros le vendemos a ellos por 20 o 30 millones de dólares las figuras. Ellos no nos venden a nosotros. Entonces no creo que tenga miedo ni Kaká, ni Ronaldinho, ni Robinho, ni Messi, ni Tevez, ni Agüero de venir a jugar a la altura. Por eso es una decisión ridícula. Es una decisión que no tiene sentido.
Football has also been an opportunity for players to defect from Fidel Castro's communist Cuba. U.S. broadcaster Univision reports the players defected during an Olympic qualifying game against the U.S.
Los 5 futbolistas cubanos desertaron después de este partido. Era Cuba contra Estados Unidos, el marcador de goles 1-1. Pero con su salida los cubanos le metieron un autogol al gobierno de la isla.
Nosotros determinamos que íbamos a salir del hotel, por la parte de atrás del hotel.
Cuentan que primero 3 se pusieron de acuerdo y otros 2 estaban haciendo lo mismo por su lado. Al final se coordinaron para burlar la vigilancia, dejar al equipo y no volver a su tierra.
Fue una decisión difícil, ¿no? Pero bueno, se abrieron las puertas y terminé, por decirlo de alguna manera, ¿no? Experimentar, a ver qué puedo dar futbolísticamente, qué puedo hacer por mi vida, quién puedo ser.
Todavía con la camiseta puesta y el nombre del país que los vio nacer, ven ahora el futuro desde otra perspectiva.
Yo muy contento y el ánimo arriba. Solamente te digo que deserté porque quise experimentar mi nivel sobre el fútbol.
A Chilean second division team is about to go big time. They are literally one game away from qualifying to the South American Cup. Chile's Tele 13 reports this is the result of a group of local businessmen and the whole town that rallied behind the team.
¿Contento ahora? Sí, de todas maneras. Y siempre los nervios están igual. ¡Gol de Yulense! Ahora sí, ¿o no? Ahora estamos felices, felices con el triunfo de Yulense. Sí, puta feliz, por Chillán, muy contento. ¡Esta bandera del campeón, compadre!
La fiesta se desató de inmediato. En las calles, los hinchas que no pudieron viajar a Linares celebraron la clasificación a la Copa Sudamericana.
Contento de ver a él la historia que logramos algo tan grande con un equipo de una ciudad tan chica. Dentro de tercera a primera apoyando a Ñublense en todos lados.
De este modo, Ñublense, tras 92 años de vida, por primera vez llega a una competencia internacional en medio de la alegría de una ciudad entera.
From a pretty much unknown sport to being women's World Cup champs for years in a row, football has made tremendous inroads in the U.S. According to a Los Angeles filmmaker, Mexican fans have had a lot to do with the growing popularity of this sport.
I think we have the best fans in the league.
We demand the best from our team, and we demand the best from the fans.
Buenas tardes.
Desde su casa pueden pasar a la conocida Casa Club de aquí de todo Estados Unidos. Cualquier aficionado de Chivas puede venir y entrar, que es su club.
100 años de cogerme a la cadena, 100 años de compartir donde tú estés, por eso yo te voy a alentar, ilusionado voy a estar, de visitante o de local, con el orgullo nacional. 100 años de...
Este viene siendo casi siempre el punto de partida hacia cuando vamos a los estadios o cuando vamos a algún lugar, porque nosotros no solamente nos juntamos cuando hay un partido o algo, sino que esto es Más que una hinchada o una barra brava, somos una familia. Pues como ves, aquí todo es rojiblanco y aquí cualquier persona que lleve los colores adentro son bienvenidos, no importa la edad, no importa el sexo.
Gracias a ustedes se da por venir aquí con nosotros, se da a convivir un poco con la afición de Chivas, que es la más sincera, la más trabajadora, la que más apoya y nunca abandona. Ahora nos toca a nosotros representar a la Legión 1908, apoyando siempre a Chivas. Porque primero para nosotros están los colores rojiblancos, antes que cualquier otra cosa.
You're born with Chivas in your heart. My dad was a diehard Chivas fan, and he raised me that way. As I said, Chivas. You know, you're just born with it, and you live with it, and you're gonna die with it. You know, it's that way it's always gonna be.
In our studios to talk about football, the business and the game, we have Thomas Crowder, fellow in the humanities at Stanford University, from Los Angeles, filmmaker Maylin Moreno, and from Washington, D.C., we are joined by Branko Milanovic, visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Ms. Moreno, thanks for being with us today. Your documentary talks about the soccer fans in the United States. What were you able to find?
Well, I found that growing up myself in the United States playing soccer was an entirely different thing than being a fan and knowing how to watch soccer. I found that I learned so much about the game by following fans who would have the patience and the understanding of the game to sit and watch and support a team over a season, over a lifetime. And it was entirely different. It's given me a whole new appreciation for the sport that I had been playing and even starting to coach with my children. And now I just love the game so much and understand a whole lot more about it.
But you're talking about people who are not just fans. It seems like it's almost an obsession with this game.
It's a life. It's a life for them. So many of the fans that I've been following are as self-described fanaticos, and they have found a family in their supporters group. They make friends, and they find people to date, people to marry, people they can rely on in their everyday lives. So they bring soccer home and back to the stadium with them every week.
Mr. Milanovic, I think people in the United States have a difficult time understanding how entire countries will just stop whenever their team is playing. Do you think that this might be opium for the masses, or that's kind of the way that it's viewed?
Well, that's actually a good expression. It is true that, of course, as you said, the countries come to a stop. You know, I've traveled to many places, and I've often seen very, very different countries that would stop functioning when one or another kind of a game was going on. But one aspect that I just would very briefly like to mention, and that my work is involved with that, is globalization and soccer, in the sense that soccer is probably the most globalized profession, the labor market, which is entirely now almost open internationally. You don't have doctors or engineers or workers going so freely from country to country as the soccer players do.
Mr. Crowder, is soccer being used by governments, let's say, for political gain?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and to go back to the Argentinian case, of course, the famous case is the dictatorship in Argentina. While the World Cup was taking place, there were people being tortured in concentration camps. And soccer players that belonged to the national team that won the World Cup that year have to struggle with this issue, and are often asked when they go to news shows, you know, what about the dictatorship? Did you know that people were being tortured at the time that you were playing the games, etc.? So it's still part of the debate in Argentina.
But is this something that's unique to Latin America, or is it also used in the same way, let's say in Asia and in Europe?
No, I think it's common in every part of the world.
What about the element of violence? Because we've heard in recent games, and it seems to be a lot more frequent, that there's a lot of violence between conflicting teams. Some soccer games have had to be canceled. Do you think that is also affecting the game and the future of the game?
I would not sort of exaggerate. Obviously, the violence has increased, but you know, the violence has been with football for a long time, since its very beginnings in the 1920s at the international level. So I'm not sure that actually violence is now greater than it was before. It has always been a sport which actually somebody also mentioned. It was also a sport that divided, it assembled people but brought them together, but it also divided them. It divided them socially, because there were teams that were closer to the left-wing parties, others that were right-wing parties, or ethnically, or by race. So there was always this element of division, as well as the element of sort of bringing people together.
Mr. Crowder, it seems that the violence that takes place in this game transcends just the game. It has a lot to do with the political and economic situation in the country itself.
Yeah, I think I have to disagree, but I think violence has increased in the last years in Argentina, particularly since after the dictatorship, what we call as hinchadas, no? Which are small groups that belong to a big group of fans, have become part of organized crime in a way, and also involving politics. They're often hired to protect candidates for president, for example, sometimes deputies or senators. They're hired for all kinds of dirty work. And in Argentina, there's a big crisis right now. A young man was shot 2 weeks ago, a fan from Vélez Sarsfield, and the game had to be canceled. So I think it's something that that the government is trying to tackle, but it's a very complex issue and has to be taken very seriously.
This is a sport where Latin America excels. Is this a way for Latin America to kind of create a name for itself on the world stage through this game?
For sure. I think the soccer federations of each country know that, no? And they have tried in the last few years to show that there's something particular about their own team, so to give each team a sort of a flavor of its national identity. I think that's a good selling point for these federations.
What change do you foresee then in the future with this demographic shift, with this new population, as far as the popularity of football in the United States?
Well, the potential is immense. I think the MLS League has made some big mistakes when it began, when it was relaunched here in the United States, with some changes to the traditional rules of soccer, for example. But now they have adapted, and they're really pushing their teams to compete, no, in the continent, and look at Latin America also as part of the same market. So I think that's a good strategy. They brought some stars from Latin America, some really big names, Barros Esqueloto, Ángel, Piojo López, for example, to play this season. And I think that was also very important, because fans and the sons of immigrants here in the United States will look at the teams and will see, well, here's a guy that came from my father's or my mother's country playing in the MLS. I'm going to look at these games, you know, and I'm going to maybe become fan of this North American team. They might have a team in Latin America, but now they have the chance to be fans of a North American team, and that's, I think, very, very important.
But as far as respect on the world stage, you were talking about players coming to the United States. Let's use the case of David Beckham, who's probably the most well-known. According to the rest of the world, he was old.
Yes.
And he really shouldn't have been playing. So how do you see that's going to help increase the image on the world stage?
Well, it's true that most of the players, famous players that come from the rest of the world to play in the United States, are older, but they're also very, very famous, and they have, of course, great technique, so they can pass on that technique to the young players. For example, Barros Esqueloto is a good case. Very, very famous player in Argentina. Came to play for the United States, very happy to be in the United States. And he's a good mentor for the young players on the team. So yes, they're old, but they also bring a lot of experience, and they know a lot about the business of soccer. Not only how to play on the field, but they're also very smart about how they sign their contracts, and all those things are invaluable for the young players here in the United States.
Ms. Moreno, what have you seen as the reaction of the fans when they hear that a famous but older player is coming to the United States to play?
Well, in the case of Cuauhtemoc Blanco, who came from America, Chivas' arch rival, he came to play for Chicago Fire last July. The reaction was overwhelming. I mean, anybody who hated Chivas in LA came to watch his debut at the Home Depot Center last summer. I mean, that game was sold out in an instant and was really, really difficult to even get to the stadium because of the response. I think it's just an amazing thing to have more attention brought to the quality of play in the U.S. with players like Cuauhtemoc. And it's clear that the quality of play is improving. And the Chivas Guadalajara now has essentially overridden its long-time 50-year policy of not ever hiring a player born outside of Mexico in order to take a couple of Mexican-American players from California. I mean, this is a long-standing tradition that was insurmountable 10 years ago, and now suddenly there are players that they're willing to break tradition over.
If you're talking about the business, I think it's very important to mention what's going on with the young players, especially in Latin America. There's kids that are 13, 14, 15 that are being bought by very important teams from the rest of the world, from Europe mainly. So, and that's almost child labor, no? And that's something that the governments in Latin America will have to tackle, because they cannot let these kids go away and move to a foreign country and play sort of professionally, although supposedly it's amateur, but they're almost playing professionally. And that has been the case when the teams go on tour to play in Europe, the parents of the kids go with them, and the heads of the teams in Europe go and talk to the parents, and they say, hey, I give you a job, I give you an apartment in Europe, and then you bring your kid when they're 13 or 12, 13, 14, when they cannot sign a contract.
So this is recruiting that takes place
Correct.
a lot earlier than it does here in the United States.
Yeah, and that's very, very dangerous. And many, many members of governments in Latin America are very, very concerned about that. And so changes will have to be made with the law, especially labor laws. No?
Mr. Milanovic, what about the difference of soccer? You were talking about globalization and soccer coming into the rest of the world, particularly in the United States. It seems like it's a lot more popular with women, and they say that soccer is for little girls, and that's very different than the way that it's viewed in Latin America as well as in Europe.
Well, yeah, partly I think it is true. You know, we don't know how successful soccer will eventually be in this country. You know, that since at least the 1960s or early 70s, we remember, actually I remember the time of Cosmos and Pele and so on. But number of players, a number of people who play soccer in the United States is increasing, and it's actually huge. And with the inflow, I would say, of coaches, or even at the junior level, of coaches from Africa and from Latin America, I actually believe that the soccer does have a future, not only among girls, and after all, the United States was a world champion in women's soccer, but also among men.
And perhaps the inclusion of David Beckham into the United States might help. I trust you enjoyed today's program. I'd like to thank our guest here in San Francisco, Thomas Crowder from Stanford University, and from Los Angeles, filmmaker Maylene Moreno, and from Washington, D.C., Branko Milanovic, visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. We also want to thank you at home or on the web for joining us today. Also, thanks go to American University in Washington, D.C. for their support in producing this program. Join us next time when we take a closer look at Latin America through the eyes of Latin American media. To learn more about Pulso Latino and Latin America, just log on to linktv.org. I'm Ana Cuevas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time here on Latin Pulse.
Latin Pulse was made possible by support from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Pulso Latino es posible gracias al apoyo de John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation y el William and Flora Hewlett Foundation.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs that connect you to the world.